I'm so happy to have this opportunity to speak with Pranidhi Varshney. And Pranidhi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Todd.
Yeah, I'm
Appreciate
so
the opportunity. Yeah.
absolutely. I found your incredible content on YouTube, and your YouTube channel is at Pranidhi V, which I highly recommend
Yeah.
everyone checking out. And I was just really inspired by your work, and I'm just excited to have this chance to speak with you. So thank you very much. Can you give like a short, like if I asked you what is your job title, how would you answer that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is like I'm a wiper of noses and butts because I'm a mother of two.
Good
I'm a mother of
answer.
two young children. They're 2 and 5, and that's what I spend most of my time doing. But at the Yoga Shala, gosh, that's such a good question, and way to get an answer that's more specific than just I teach yoga. I guess my primary job description at the Shala would be a cultivator of community.
Mm, good
Yeah,
answer.
that's what I really see myself. I see that as sort of my life's mission as a mother and as a yoga teacher. And it's become even more clear to me after the pandemic, which was a time in which we really, lived in isolation for quite some time. Depending on where we were living, what part of the country we were living in, that period lasted different durations for people. But for me here in California, our shala was closed for 14 months, and like playgrounds were closed. It was pretty intense time. And so since coming back, especially, I felt pretty called to just focus my energies on gathering together with people in person. And
Yes,
actually, even before the pandemic, we did a lot of that at our shala. Things have changed, of course, and we can talk about that as the conversation moves forward. But yeah, I would say I like to put a lot of energy into cultivating community.
that's cool. Great answer. In relation to your yoga teaching career, you are an Ashtanga yoga teacher, am I correct?
That's correct.
And can you give me a little bit of your background in relation to, was your first yoga class an Ashtanga yoga class, or did you practice yoga and then find Ashtanga and then go seriously down the Ashtanga track? How did that evolve?
Yeah. So I started practicing yoga very casually in high school, just sort of with DVDs and things like that. And then actually in college, one of the first yoga classes that I took in an actual studio was in actually it was at a gym. And it was actually the primary series, but it was just called Power Yoga, with little modifications here and there from the primary series, but basically primary. And I didn't know that at the time, but I really fell in love with the practice. It was a lead class. And once I figured out, okay, this is Ashtanga Yoga, then I found an Ashtanga Yoga studio in the city. I was going to college just outside of Chicago. I found a studio in the city and I started taking lead classes there. But it wasn't really until I moved to California that I started practicing my Mysore style. That was in 2010, 2009 or 2010. Um, and around that time, I took a yoga teacher training. So my Ashtanga practice was growing around the same time that I was training, very on a very basic level to be able to share the practice. And then over the years, I became more serious and devoted to the practice. And Manju Joyce is my main teacher. So I went and studied with him all over the world. And his home base is actually in Encinitas, which is not too far from me. So I would pop in there from time to time as well. And his approach has really influenced me. So yeah, he's my sort of guiding light in terms of how I share the practice. And around 2015 is when I opened the Shala. So we are going on 8 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
saw I saw a post on Instagram that you were advertising or showing that we made it 8 years. That's
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
big deal, right? Especially
Yeah.
like you said, surviving the pandemic and surviving the
Yeah.
pandemic in LA, like you said,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
14 months closed is a long time. So I have questions for you regarding that. My wife and I
Yeah.
we're in Juno Beach, Florida, a different type of approach was
Hmm.
taken. We were mandated closed for 9 weeks total, so like not very
Wow.
long. But that doesn't
I'm
mean
jealous.
it didn't mean it was easy when we, we pay rent,
Oh,
so
I bet.
my landlord
Yeah, of
didn't
course.
like make any concessions, and it was
Mhm.
we have to do this, but it was not easy because it doesn't mean everybody wanted to
Yeah,
come in and all that sort of stuff too. But
of course.
I
Yeah.
guess I'm curious, how did you survive that 14 months financially? Did your landlord
Yeah.
require you to pay rent? And then I'm also super curious about the way that your studio sounds structured in the relationship to it. I saw a terminology that it's like a community supported Ashtanga studio. So
Hmm.
I have a
Hmm.
ton of questions for you, but maybe
Yeah.
let's start with that. Let's start with that. What is
Yeah.
the
That
how
sounds
does your
great.
how does your pay structure work in terms
Yeah.
of like the community idea?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's actually really great you bring this up because I think as yoga teachers, there's a tendency to not be super transparent about the financial aspect of things. And I think it's time to break that open. So I'm happy to talk about it.
Cool.
Financially getting through COVID, it was interesting. We actually had our 5 year anniversary of the Shala during COVID. So that was in 2020. And like you said, at the beginning, we thought we'd be closed for a couple of weeks and turn into a couple of months. And our lease, that was in March, starting in March of 2020, and a couple months turned into more months. And by August, when our 5 year, we had a 5 year lease, the 5 year lease was up. And I actually, in the preparation, the process of figuring out what we were going to do, whether we were going to keep our lease, because at that time it was really the great unknown. We had no idea like what was going on, when we were going to be allowed to open. I actually, because we had this community orientation, actually called together several of my students who were kind of our core crew, people who've been there since the beginning or were really invested in the community. And I laid it out for them. I said, here's our situation. And I got a lot of feedback from them, knowing ultimately that I was going to make the decision. I mean, I'm the one on the lease, my partner and I, my husband and I are the ones on the lease. But it was really important for me to get that community feedback and to make the decision in the collaborative process. And we did make the decision to keep the lease, but I went to the landlord and asked for some rent relief during the time because we had no idea how long we'd be closed. And I was fortunate that because the timing of that 5 year renewal came in 2020, he was actually, motivated to kind of keep us renting the space because as a landlord also, he doesn't know how long this thing was going to
Yeah.
keep, be going on. So, and we've been great tenants for him. We've really taken care of the space and also making our financial contributions on time every month. So he was motivated to keep us there. So he gave us rent relief for about another year. So our basically from summer 2020 to summer 2021, I think I'm remembering that correctly, we got some rent relief. We didn't have to pay nothing, but we had to pay much less than our full rent.
Yeah.
That helped us get through financially, but ultimately what helped us the most is what you referenced earlier, which is our fee structure. So when I first started the Shala, based in LA. Everything around here was priced at your typical sort of like $180, $200 a month range for a Mysore style practice. And most teachers give some relief to students if they have financial hardship, but you kind of talk to the teacher, you work out a special arrangement or whatever. And what I saw in the studios that I was practicing in, that I was teaching in, assisting in, is that a lot of people were just getting priced out. That's a pretty high price point for most people. And I wanted to create a space that was more inclusive, that would welcome people, who have all kinds of financial situations. And so from the beginning, we've had this very open approach to our fee structure, which is that everybody contributes monthly, but that amount of your contribution is open. Each student decides what they want to contribute. We have a suggested
Wow.
range of $100 to $200 a month.
Mm.
We have students contributing less than that if they need to, but generally people fall in the $100 to $200 a month range. And because we had set up that structure from the beginning, our students have always felt like their financial contribution is not a tit for tat in terms of this is what I'm paying to get my teaching or whatever. This is what I'm paying to be able to come to the Shala. No, it's about this is what I'm contributing to the community so that the space can be open, so that the teachers can show up, so that we can have everything we need to practice. So everything is going into one, pot, basically. And so that ethos is actually what carried us through the pandemic, because even though our physical space was closed for 14 months, I would say the majority of our students continued to contribute financially because they knew that I was still paying rent on the space, even though we were closed. And they knew that if they didn't, the space might not be there when we were ready to return. And we kept the community going. We had Zoom practice and we had, little outdoor events and stuff once that was allowed. So I tried to keep the community alive, even though we couldn't gather in person.
Yes.
And it's been super interesting to witness what's happened since we've reopened, because that community spirit, I think, got us through the pandemic. It got us to 2021, early summer, May of 2021, when we were allowed to open back up again. Since then, our community is almost entirely transformed. So most of the students that were there before the pandemic are gone. And now it's almost a whole new batch of students.
Mm.
People either moved or stopped practicing or found, other things that they wanted to do with their time. And so I've witnessed this sort of cycle of death and rebirth within a community.
Yeah.
It's been kind of amazing to witness,
Yeah.
The vibe is totally different. My teaching partner is somebody new. So it feels like a whole new community, but now we're in that process again of rebuilding that community ethos with a brand new batch of people. And it just
Right.
feels really cool because I think, as I know I've been talking for a while, but it's
Please.
just really been a really amazing experience to witness and to sort of lead the community through, because I find myself less attached than I was before, because I've witnessed the sort of letting go that needs to happen in order for something new to come in. So that, this is what we're cultivating in our yoga practice too, sort of surrender and ability to let go and not be so attached to outcomes. As a teacher and as a community leader, it's been interesting to bring that practice in, and
Nice.
perhaps not even consciously, but to
Yeah.
have that sort of just happen and be witness to it has been pretty cool.
Oh, that sounds amazing. We've had similar type of experience of a whole new crop and rebirth,
Right.
and I'm feeling like like lately like a real like resurgence, whereas but it's taken like a while. Like I just had this feeling when I
Yeah.
was at home, like I'm gonna reopen and everybody's just gonna come flooding back in, and it was such a gradual, and it really knocked everyone
Yes.
off their normal routine, like all that work that
Yes.
you had put into cultivating people showing up and building in time for their practice every day. And when
Mm-hmm.
that all like got lost, it's almost like it kind of hit the reset button a big time for sure.
Yes.
I noticed that as well.
Yeah. It
That's
was a great
amazing.
disruptor that whole
Yeah.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
How I'm curious because maybe there might be other studios that yoga studio owners and or yoga teachers that are listening that
Mm.
are thinking, oh, I wonder if that would work for me too. And would
Yeah.
you, and it does sound, what's incredible is that people continued to contribute because they felt the value of what you're offering, and they wanted to
Mm-hmm.
continue to support that, which is absolutely amazing. We had a similar type of experience here.
Yeah.
Um, do I guess, are there any like downsides, or it sounds like it's working really well for you, but is there anything I would need to look out for if I was to try to adopt that model?
Yeah. It's a great question. I would say that doing any sort of model in which that's not the conventional approach, which is, this is the price and that's what you pay.
Yeah.
Um, it just requires a certain amount of flexibility and openness and willingness to change and adapt if something isn't working.
Yeah.
I have an example of that early on. Um, I had just sort of left it open, and I had not given any. I had given a suggested range, $100 to $200, but I had just like kind of left it open on our website in terms of, most of our payments are done online, so just left it open and people could choose. And I found that just on a design level, people were just choosing the lowest amount. Oh, they were just choosing 100. And I was like, well, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to get me to where I need to be, because I also wanted to make sure that we were solvent. Losing money on the shala was really not an option for me and my family. So I wanted to be solvent quickly, and efficiently. And so I just sort of changed, design wise on the website. I started just offering amounts. So 100, 125, 150, 175, and 200. And just that simple design change made so much difference, because
Nice.
people then just were like, okay, these are the options, and I'm just going to pick what feels right. And then that's what they pick. And at the first couple of years, I think we didn't have a recurring option, but then once we added that, that also helped us a lot, because people could just like choose the amount, and then it would just be automatic, and they wouldn't have to go through this like decision fatigue every month of like, okay, now what am I going to
Yeah.
choose and what am I going to do? So that recurring thing really helped us a lot. So things like that,
Great
as
insight.
it's
Yeah,
all
that's
part of the
awesome.
learning process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, these little things can really help. And also just being attuned to what the community needs. My model works because we're here, but in another community, you may need a different
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different options. I have friends who do like more of a sponsorship model for making sure kind of lower income students can come in. So they have their set rate, but then they have a rate where if you are financially abundant and you want to sponsor somebody else, you can pay a higher rate, and then that additional fee goes towards, sponsoring that lower income
Cool.
student.
It's
There are
good.
approaches like that.
Yeah.
There are lots of different approaches. I think it just takes some creativity and some flexibility.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah,
love hearing all this. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I
yeah,
enjoy talking to other studio owners because it's such an interesting process to keep on top of. Are you
yeah,
what is your biggest challenge currently as a studio community
yeah.
facilitator, owner, operator?
Yeah, I mean, there are challenges. I think most recently, or what's been present for me in the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic, is during that time I also had another kid. My son
Mm,
was born in 2021, in August of
congratulations. Wow.
2021. Yeah, thank you. He's two
Yeah.
now.
Uh-huh.
But then coming out of the pandemic, so before the pandemic, I used to teach 6 days a week. Um, During the pandemic, every like we talked earlier, it was a great disruptor, and I had been wanting to cut down to 5 days a week for a long time, just because I like having weekends for my family and for my kids. So I finally dropped Sundays during the pandemic, because we only did Zoom Monday through Friday during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then once we came back to in person, we just stuck with the Monday, Friday. And then I gradually brought another teacher on who is very accomplished in her own right, but came to Ashtanga a little bit later. And so we've been working together for a few years. And now she's also a mother. She's a mother of 3 young children. And now we've worked it out so that we each teach 3 days a week. So we have 6 days of coverage at the Shala, but we each teach 3 days. And that's just so much more manageable for
Nice.
me,
Yeah.
to be able to just teach 3 days a week and do, as you know, it takes a lot to do the back end admin and all that stuff, and then have the rest of my time for my kids. So that was a big challenge for me to sort of work out this balance
Yeah.
between the shala and home life and the admin and all that stuff. So now I feel like I'm in a pretty good place with that
Awesome. Yeah.
balance.
With
Yeah,
eight years under your belt, that's a good feeling, isn't it? Because like there's that idea when you first
yeah,
start open, it's like, okay, we got to make it 1 year. I mean, obviously you sign a
yeah,
5 year or maybe a three
yeah,
if you're a little
yeah,
nervous, but to make it three
yeah,
years as a small business is a huge accomplishment. The next milestone, we think five. You get to
yeah,
five, you go, holy cow, I've made it. To get to
yeah,
eight, you're like, okay, something's happening here. Like this is
yeah,
we've got this
yeah.
ball rolling.
Right.
What are your hours like when you teach? What time do you start, and for how long do you operate? And are you teaching
Yeah.
only Mysore, or are you operating
Hmm.
like classes and or classes that are outside of the Ashtanga model as well, such as say gentle
Yeah.
or yin or any of that type of stuff?
Yeah. No, our shala is actually pretty exclusively Ashtanga.
Uh-huh.
And before the pandemic, we had an afternoon program and a morning program. But our afternoon program was always pretty small, and it totally dropped away during the pandemic. And we've tried to gauge interest in an afternoon program. It just hasn't really hit. And so we're just open in the mornings now. Students come in as early as 6:30 or 7. And we're there at the Shala till usually 11 or so, but that time includes teaching and practice time for the teachers. So if you go to our website, you'll see that our tagline is an autonomous and interdependent community of Ashtanga Yoga practitioners. And I chose that tagline pretty intentionally because I wanted to create an environment in which students are empowered. They're not dependent on the teacher all the time. So the Shala is open for over 4 hours usually every morning. But Meredith, that's my partner, her and I usually only teach for about 2 hours. So we're teaching for a couple hours and then doing our practice afterward, usually. So students are welcome to stay late and practice with us and come early and start their practice before we arrive. But we usually offer instruction for about 2 hours. And in that way, students are not always looking to us to do stuff for them. You know, we're happy to guide them and offer adjustments and instruction while we're in that teaching role. But we also encourage them to not be super dependent
Yeah.
on always having a teacher there.
Smart.
Yeah. And also
Yeah.
it kind of breaks down this hierarchy when they, when they see us, okay, at a certain time and the room's quieting down, we're going to roll our mat out and just be with them as fellow practitioners. Because for me, it's very important to, yes, there's a certain amount of hierarchy that comes with being in a teacher role, but then it's important at a certain time to let that go and just be in community with everybody else.
Agreed.
I've never been the sort of teacher who likes to sit on a pedestal or stand on a pedestal. I just want to acknowledge that I have accumulated some experience, some wisdom that's come from that experience, and I'm here to offer that. But ultimately, teaching for me is a collaborative process, and the practice, the student owns their practice. I don't own their practice.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah.
What have you seen in relation to the Ashtanga world where that pitfall, you've seen people fall into that pitfall of say pedestal, the putting up on the pedestal. What
Mm-hmm.
type of outcomes have you seen because of that approach? Obviously everything comes with good
Yeah.
and bad, some
Yeah.
positive benefits, some maybe not
Of
so.
course.
What
Yeah.
what is it about that you are skeptical or careful
Yeah.
to not fall into yourself?
Yeah. So I think that, you know, at a certain in the early stages of one's practice, I think it can be really beneficial to surrender to a process and to trust that the person leading you through that process has your best interest in mind and is holding that sort of mantle for you, you know, and encouraging you to um, work through challenges and also encouraging you to, know or figure out when to soften and take it easy. And so it can be really, really helpful. And actually, I would say it might be essential at the beginning to give part of your, I don't want to say give part of yourself, but um, just allow somebody to hold that for you. Trust somebody. The thing is that you want to make sure you're trusting the right person. You want to make sure you're trusting somebody who really does have your best interest at heart, not their own ego or their own career or their own allegiance to something that they've pledged allegiance to, which, is a little opaque, but I think we can probably all know what I'm talking about in the Ashtanga world. There is a hierarchy built in the conventional Ashtanga world. And so if one's teacher is really baked into that hierarchy, then it can be difficult for that person to look at the student in front of them and teach that person versus teaching whatever system that they feel allegiance to.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there can be benefits to surrendering at the beginning. At some point in the practice process, for some people, it take a couple years, few years, 5 to 10 years. I would say within 5 to 10 years, if you're still super dependent on your teacher, like that teacher has done you a disservice, in my opinion, because you, an Ashtanga Yoga practitioner specifically, this is a self practice, right? The way that it's taught, Mysore style, we're not doing the same thing as everybody else at the same time. We're building a practice that's our own. We should be able to take it, anywhere. We should be able to practice when we're on vacation. We should be able to practice in when we're in a pandemic. We should be able to practice in half an hour if that's all the time we have between taking care of our kids and work or whatever our responsibilities are. I think, yes, it's a good teacher's job to empower one's students and make sure they have enough confidence in their practice that they can figure things out for themselves. Yeah, I think the pitfall of teaching in a very authoritarian way is that the students are just disempowered.
Great point.
Yeah.
Good point. I guess what
Um,
it's so seductive though to be in that hierarchical environment, I suppose. That's what the attraction is, maybe. Like there's like a certain level of I mean, I personally, from my own experience of traveling to
yeah.
Mysore and
Yeah.
practicing, this was in 2004, and
Hmm.
it was really seductive in the sense of
It
like
is seductive.
it was
Yeah.
amazing. Like I was like, wow, but I also had this feeling of humility or feeling like everybody is so much higher than me and above me,
Mm,
which did feel kind of nice. Like I felt like it was a humbling type of
yeah.
experience. And I think that was also a little bit attractive too. But I
Yeah.
personally, because I had been coming from the Bikram yoga world, my wife and I used to own a
Okay.
yoga studio down in San Diego.
Yeah.
And so I would travel and practice with them. I
Hmm.
saw a lot of like abuse stuff that went down with
Yeah.
him that
Yeah.
kind of caused me to like, we got to get out of here. And we thought, let's go to Mysore and practice with Patabi Joyce. And it
Hmm.
seemed very different to me at the time. Like it seemed
Hmm.
like, well, obviously, like going to Mysore and seeing the Mysore practice was a huge eye opener in terms of self
Yeah.
practice and someone not barking orders at you while you're practicing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
extremely attractive. But I also at the same time felt like I don't want to fall into that hierarchical structure again and try to
Hmm.
climb that ladder. Like I just
Yeah.
saw all the bad stuff that can happen that from that with
Yeah. Yeah.
the La Cienega perspective that I saw there. So
Hmm.
I'm curious what you have this sort of maturity I'm getting from you, like where you just kind of seem like a free agent and you're comfortable with that. You're not necessarily
Yeah.
clamoring
Yeah.
to climb that ladder to get some sort of social status. And I'm curious, where did that come from? How did you get
Yeah.
forced into that
I don't
direction?
know. Maybe I've always had a bit of a rebellious spirit, so it's probably just inbuilt. um, but early on in my teaching, there was more conflict around it. But I feel like I've had these moments in my life, sort of fork in the road moments, and I do I do think there's something inbuilt in me where once I come to those fork in the road moments and I choose, I have a tendency to just be good with my decisions. And so I did have that fork
Cool.
in the road moment with Ashtanga Yoga in terms of teaching, where I had gone to Mysore one time. It's actually the year after Patabi Joyce died. So I didn't meet him, but I practiced with Charat. And like you said, it was very seductive, and not just seductive, but it was very meaningful. I had a great time there. For me, going to India is a bit more complex, perhaps, than the average Westerner because I am Indian myself. So already for me, the smoke and mirrors don't really do much. Like I'm not so well, we're talking about the word seduced. So
Well, I
yeah,
love
I'm
it.
not so
I,
seduced by all the trappings. And I think there are a lot of trappings. Um, I think India is a beautiful place, but anyone that comes from a culture sees the complexities in the culture, you know, in a more intimate way than
yes.
somebody looking from the outside, usually. So for me, India is a complicated place, and I love it. And so yeah, I loved being there. I came back, and I was teaching back in LA for a while. I hadn't opened my shala yet, but around the time where maybe the year or so before I was going to open it, I had to make a decision. Like, am I going to keep going to Mysore, or am I going to do my own thing? And my heart was just telling me like that path is not for you. Like I said, my teacher has been Manju Joyce, and I don't really believe in a lot of what they're doing in Mysore these days. I don't believe that everybody needs to stand there from a drop back. I don't believe that everybody needs to bind their hands in Supta Kurmasana or all these little benchmarks. I just don't think it's beneficial for most students to have to meet these aesthetic benchmarks to be able to progress in their practice.
I agree
And so
100%.
for me, it became a choice of, okay, I can choose to climb the ladder just to have the paper and just to have the status, but I'm probably still going to teach the way I want to teach. So then I'll be lying, you know? So, but I don't want to lie. I don't want to be inauthentic in that way. So I just thought, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to do my own thing. And I got some backlash from the more conventional community here. And that was hard. And some of them were my friends before. But, you know, that's part of following your own path. You're going to ruffle some feathers. And I'm okay with it now. You know, it's interesting to observe that of the several Ashtanga programs that were here on the west side of LA, there's maybe a couple that are still around, and I'm one of them. So I feel pretty good about it.
I know. I agree 100%. I agree
Yeah.
100%. It feels so good to just do something because you love it. And then to have
Yeah.
that love actually keep you going. So amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
If there's no love there, then why are we doing it? In my opinion, you know, it's a little sad to me to see like some of these more, you know, you could say strict or conventional teachers just seem to have no love anymore left. And it's just a little sad for their students too.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great point. Oh, yes. What have you I have I want to ask you this. I'm a little nervous to ask it because I know it just takes
Yeah.
us down a very potentially uncomfortable conversation point. So I am willing to just like jump ship from this question right away if you're like, please, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. So
Okay.
I just
Yeah. No, I
recently
appreciate that.
I just recently read The Trauma of Caste by Thinmosi Sundarajan. And
Hmm.
have you read that?
No, I haven't read it.
Oh my gosh. So then maybe I won't be able to ask this question, but it's just a roundabout like the caste system in India, and it just
Yeah.
opened my eyes
Yeah.
really big time. And I love that you brought
Yeah.
up the smoke and mirrors element because I think like a lot of us Westerners going to India, it's like dazzling in terms of spirituality. You think, wow, this is where all
Yeah.
the answers lie. You know, this is like one of
Hmm.
the oldest
Hmm.
civilizations where some of these things I've been questioning seem to have been
Yeah.
worked out a long time ago, and perhaps every single
Yeah.
thought has been already thought before. Everything has been explored
Right.
already, and there's nothing. It's all here, and therefore,
Yeah.
and I saw the caste system, and I was like, "Whoa, this is heavy." You know, like
Yeah.
it wasn't really apparent to me, but it was. But I didn't really
Hmm.
know what was going on. But it just seemed like
Yeah.
this is so interesting. So I just would just like to ask you, I guess, what
Yeah. I
do you
mean, it's,
see? Because growing up here and going there, I'm just so curious
yeah.
how you feel about all that and interpret it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you said, you know, the answers are here. Like, and when you said that, you know, about India, the first thought that came to my mind was, yes, the answers are all there and the answers are everywhere. You know, like, yes, spirituality, there is a deep well of spirituality in India. There are also deep wells of spirituality within the Christian faith, within the Jewish faith, within the Muslim faith. There are deep wells of spirituality in all these traditions. And along with those deep wells of spirituality, there are all the complexities of being human in the real world, in a practical level. And the caste system, yeah, you know, as Westerners, especially in this cultural moment, I think we have a tendency to sort of just like, you know, in America, at least, white supremacy is something that just get talked about so much. Racism, anti-black racism, you know, racism against all kinds of people of color, as if white people are the only perpetrators of racism. And coming from a culture that does still um, adhere, perhaps not so officially, but unofficially, to the caste system. Like, I mean, it is very alive in India still. It's always been so clear to me that racism or sort of discrimination more broadly human beings separating ourselves and judging other people based on whatever characteristics we, choose. Um, that has been going on since the beginning of civilization. That's not new or unique to America or the Western world. It happens in India. It happens across the world. And so what that teaches me is that these things are universal, right? Like there's no need to demonize a specific group of people because actually we all do it. We all do it. And so the work then is to reach into our wells where our spiritual hearts are alive and try to bring that love into the real world and put it into action. I mean, in essence, to me, when I think about activism, like, you know, activism now is such a watered down term and it's come to mean something very specific. But when I think about activism, I think about people like Gandhi, MLK, and those are just the ones that come to mind, but these are people that led with love and they're complex human beings too. I'm not saying that they were perfect. You dig a little deeper into both of their histories and there's complexity there. There's nuance there,
Yep.
but no human being is perfect. We can only try to lead with love. And yeah, I think we need that in all parts of the world. And it doesn't do us any good to look through rose colored glasses at any specific part of the world.
Beautifully said. Great
Mm.
answer. I think you navigated
Yeah,
that
thank
really
you.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
You I know it's a tough one, but you made it feel really, really easy. So good job. Um,
Thank you.
I'm curious, you had brought up earlier, right before we hit the record button, expressing interest in maybe either discussing or mentioning the idea of inclusivity and then the broadening that potentially you'd like to see happen in the Ashtanga world. Can you speak a little bit about
Yeah.
what you're thinking in that direction?
Yeah. I mean, I think it can start with really in practical ways. We were just talking about these sort of aesthetic benchmarks that sometimes students are encouraged to, accomplish or whatever, be proficient in whatever language people use before moving on. I think just opening that up can make a space more inclusive just on a physical level. It can it can make it so that people are not so concerned with the aesthetics of their posture. And I think it can bring the awareness more internal when we're focused on what's happening with our breath, how are we feeling in our bodies, how is our stamina, all these things. If those can be our guiding forces in terms of, how we're progressing through the series. And also if we can open up the sequences a little bit so that after a student has put in their 5 years or whatever, or even before that, there can be some openness on, hey, I have this specific issue. Can I bring in some postures from second series or even third series to address this issue? If we can be more open with things like that, we already create a more inclusive space. And then the financial aspect is another part, can we open up our practice spaces so that they're inclusive to all kinds of people on the financial spectrum in terms of socioeconomic status? And there's a lot of talk about diversity, in the culture more broadly and in the yoga world. I think diversity is very important. But if we're only thinking about diversity in terms of race or whatever specific metric we have in mind, um, that's narrow in and of itself. If you actually, I've found at least that if we open up the financial side of things, we get people coming in with lots of different life experiences. And the racial diversity, at least in some, where I am, at least a place like LA, it automatically happens because we're opening up who can walk in the door, But then in addition to that, you get, different viewpoints because a person that can afford $200 a month without a problem has a different life perspective, life experiences than someone who can only afford 50. It's just, they just have different life experiences. And so then we bring in different perspectives into the room. And I also think it's really important, this is a bit of a maybe controversial thing to say, but it's become clear to me that politically also, there's this sense that yoga studios need to adhere to a particular ideology. And I think that can actually be a little exclusionary because what if somebody wants to come practice who voted for Trump in the last election? Like, are we not going to make that person feel comfortable? You know, I'm not saying that teachers have to like cut off their own views or not speak about politics at all in the space. In fact, you know, maybe it's useful in some contexts. Um, but I've just become aware of that in the last few years that, you know, we're not in a situation in which half the country is good and half the country is evil. I just really don't believe that. I believe that there are things we need to learn from each other. And whatever we can do to make people comfortable communing, being together, for me, that feels very important.
Excellent. I
I
agree.
imagine you
I
have I
agree.
imagine you have some of that living in Florida, you know, that you
Oh,
have a range of perspectives coming in
oh
to
my
the your
gosh.
Shala.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, it's a really good question because like the track that I always take is I just don't talk about it at all
Mm-hmm.
unless I'm on a one-on-one level.
Right.
And then, maybe there'll be a reason to converse, but I really try to keep the politics out of our studio
Yeah.
because as you see, as you know, it just that's such a heavy thing. But I mean, the politics element
Yeah.
is really just like the polarization element, it seems. And then we could be
Yeah.
polarized with any subject, like as we're seeing
That's
right now,
exactly
right?
right.
Like there's
Yeah.
polarity on every topic. So I don't know, like lately, personally, I keep getting this incredible sense that we're going through something that's just so amazing right now. It seems so heavy at times, but also at the same time, I think we're going to really come out for the better. We're going to like, it might have to get
Yeah.
really, really tough for us to get to that point where we
Mm-hmm.
all can look at each other and see
Yeah.
respect for each other, even though there's differences and opinions.
Yeah.
But I do think we're going to come out in some really incredible space. Like, what do you think, Pranidhi, when you think of, could the world, could we live in, could the earth that we live on, could we all actually get along, or do we have to have struggle and strife and conflict for existence to be
Mm.
existence? Is it is it silly for
Gosh.
me to even dream of a world where we all see not necessarily the same, but we just have respect for each
Mm.
other no matter what because we see each other as one human family? Or is that just absolute nonsense because through the competition, the struggle, and the strife, that's what builds our character and makes us
Mm-hmm.
learn something, I guess. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think we could find an answer to this
Um,
right now. I don't, but
right.
where have you been with all with the with
Yeah,
this
these are
lately?
big questions. These are big questions. And I think it's tempting to want to have an answer,
Yeah.
but I think these are unanswerable questions.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean there's not value in asking them and conversing about them,
Yeah.
you know, diving deep. And I don't think it's silly to dream of a world in which we can have mutual respect for each other. To me, um, that seems like it should be a baseline, right? Like,
Yeah.
unfortunately,
Like,
we're not
why is
there
that?
yet.
Yeah. Why is that such an outlandish idea?
Yeah, and I don't think it's outlandish, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think, you know, like all we can do is our little part. That's how I feel. And so for me, like my little part is okay, how can in my small life, how can I live in a way that honors that ideal, where I'm actually putting into practice these things that I believe in. And so for me, it's like actually things like reaching out to people who might like really believe different stuff than I do, and being like, hey, our kids like get along. Like maybe we should like go for lunch, or maybe we should get together. You know, our families should meet up, but things like that. Because only through putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations are we going to actually get anywhere. I think the second point that you said is also like really valid, that we do need some conflict and some discomfort to catalyze transformation. And I don't mean that in the way that like we need to manufacture it. We don't need to manufacture suffering. Um, But just because we all have our little egos that we live with, there's going to be times when we have conflict with other people. And so, um, if we can engage in that conflict consciously and compassionately, then if we can do it, in our little lives, then perhaps that can build, and we can do it on a community level, and maybe on a country level, a national level. I So for me, yeah, I just really believe in starting small, starting with what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point. What either posture or certain movement direction have you had to either let go of or maybe soften on the intensity that you pushed on going in that direction due
Hmm.
to age or just evolution
Oh my
or
gosh.
however you want to
Yeah. I
like I
mean,
mean our aging
um,
process. Yeah.
aging process. Yes. After my second child, I feel like my aging process catalyzed significantly. I don't know if it was something hormonal that shifted after I had him, but um, and I see it and feel it mostly in my joints, my knees specifically. So I have had to back off a lot on stuff that aggravates or puts pressure on the knees. And I'm talking about, sometimes I'll do lotus, but I can go entire weeks where I never put my legs in lotus or never even put my legs in half lotus because it doesn't feel right or there's some pain that I'm experiencing or whatever. And it's actually pretty cool because I think as Ashtangis, we're like so attached to our lotus positions, So just to let that go and find different ways of working into those postures. And then when my knees are feeling decent, to find ways of doing a lotus position that are much more engaged because I have generally my joints are over flexible. And so I don't have to really work very hard to put myself in some of these lotus type positions. I haven't had to work very hard historically, but now if I am to enter them, I have to enter them with like extreme amount of engagement um, to support my joints, to support my knees so that they don't pop or have some like tear happen. So it's been really cool to relearn how to do some of that stuff and also just to let some of the stuff go entirely and be like, I'm never going to do that again. And that's okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I started doing sometimes even my primary series practice with no lotus and things like Maritasana B and D. Um, with the leg that's supposed to be in lotus, I've started to fold it the other way, so as if it's in Mukha Ekapada Paschimottanasana position, um, which means nothing to somebody who doesn't practice Ashtanga. But if some listeners are familiar, then you can kind of picture what I'm saying. So it's a totally different way of doing Maritasana B and D, but it feels great on my knees, and it's just been really fun to do things like that.
Do you find because when you're in the external rotation position, such as Padmasana, that's where it triggers? Is it your medial or
Yeah.
lateral knee that you feel it when you're in the external
Yeah, it's on the inside. It's on the
inside?
inside.
So when
Yeah, and
you
so
when you do
any
that,
sort of lotus
yeah.
position is quite aggravated and to the point where there can be a little bit of a snapping that happens. And this used to happen earlier on too, but what I've noticed is that as I've aged, is just like the recovery doesn't happen as quickly, and so I can't afford to just be like, well, like it's fine. No, I have to like take care of it before in anticipation of some issue that might arise.
Oh man, I hear you. And then because
Yeah.
you have a 2-year-old, and so like
Yeah.
later on in the day after practice, you got to clean up the Cheez-Its off the floor, and so you're like getting
Oh
down,
yeah.
you got to stand up, and you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how am I going to get up right
Right.
now? Like what the heck? So
I gotta
there's
lift
a
him
lot
up. I
more.
gotta pick him up in the middle of the night to take him to the bathroom. Like there's all kinds of things, right? So for me, it's like yeah. Before children, I could spend the rest of my day like nursing all my little aches and pains, but I don't have that luxury anymore. So I
Yes.
need to practice in a way that's really going to support the rest of my life. And that's what I like to instill in my students too. It's
Yeah.
like you have to practice in a way that's
Yeah.
going to support whatever your life is. So I have some students whose life can be their practice. But I have to say, don't have that many students like that anymore. I did maybe
Mm.
before the pandemic, but most of my students now have full lives, whether they're parents or they're working full time or whatever it is. they need their practice to be supportive to the rest of their life,
Yeah.
not the rest of their life is there to support their practice.
Yes.
We teach in that way at the Shala. That's, it's like, efficient. Your practice doesn't have to take forever. You can modify things. You got to take, yeah, challenge oneself to the point where it feels beneficial, um, but not past that edge
Yeah.
necessarily. Yeah.
That is so good to hear. I think it's really important to talk about that and get it out there for all of us. But
Yeah.
because personally, I agree with you too. I've had to do that with my knees and with my back bending and with my
Mm-hmm.
and, at first it was this sense of loss, and now it's this big sense of gain because there's so much less pressure that I'm putting on myself, and it just feels
Yeah.
so good to just actually enjoy breathing and
Yeah.
supporting versus competing and
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's a gift to our students also, because I think unless we've had that experience and we've really honored it, we can talk a good game. But if our students then see us practicing in the same way every day, regardless of what our body feels like, or whatever it is we're going through, then they know that we're not really uh,
Yeah.
walking the walk. You know?
What about when you do your YouTube videos? Do you like the other day I had a friend I went to do some photos on the beach, and I've gone through these
Mm-hmm.
phases where I've been really trying to not post anything with yoga
Yeah.
poses in it because I feel like
Yeah.
some of my peers have been really encouraging the conversation of like yoga is not just about asana everybody and just
Right.
really
Right.
fancy
Yeah.
complicated asana is not going to attract people to
Mm-hmm.
yoga. It's going to scare them
Mm-hmm.
and or give the
Mm-hmm.
false impression of what it's about. And
Yeah.
then I just figured, you know what? Let me just do something I enjoy. Let me just go do a photo shoot on the beach. And so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
of course, pushed way harder than I probably needed to because I'm like,
Yeah.
so like I know that you're involved with camera work and
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal job with your YouTube channel. How do you balance that when like do
Yeah.
you have that little sense of you that's like, okay, I really should push because people are gonna be watching. I need to make a good representation. Here I am in my life right now, and then later on in life I'll look back
Right.
and. But
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you coach
No, honestly,
yourself?
it's so I made a conscious decision early on in my teaching career that I wasn't going to be very public with my own asanas in terms of images and stuff. So because of exactly what you just said, I don't want to give people a perception of like this is what they should look like when they're practicing yoga or anything like that. So any images of me that are online practicing or videos of practicing are just of me while I'm actually practicing, So yes, it's not like there's no images of me out there. There are, you can find them, but I have never really like done a photo shoot from my own asana in for promotional purposes. Um, uh, but I do have a lot of videos on my YouTube, but they're not of me. They're practice videos, and honestly, I haven't put a new video up in a long time, just because my kids have taken up most of my attention. But all my practice videos are very intentional, and I think the reason that people like them are because I include students that all look a little different from each other, and not just look in terms of like their ethnicity and their physical stature. There is diversity in those respects, but also in terms of what their asana looks like. I offer modifications in all my videos. Sometimes you see practice videos where modifications are offered, but they're offered, they're modeled by someone who can already do the asana like perfectly, but they're just showing the modification, and that's good. But I think it can be more people can relate to it more when they see a student who actually needs that modification, like they need to do it that way. So I have been intentional about showing those types of students in my videos, and I hope to do a second series one next year. Right now I have a half primary, a full primary, a half and half primary, half intermediate, and I'm hoping to get a full intermediate one up next year, because I really believe in the power of second series. I just think it's an amazing sequence,
Yeah.
a really transformative for the nervous system. So I think like most students, if they're dedicated, should be practicing intermediate. And there's so many modifications to make it accessible,
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, so I think in terms of having an online presence, the question that you asked is, um, I think we just need to be authentic. And for me, this is the decision that felt authentic, is to not put too many images of myself out there in a performative way, but to
Yeah.
make sure that the con the the content that I am putting out there is actually going to be useful to people.
Ah, well said. Thank you so much for explaining all that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
great to even think about that, because I know there's obviously situations where people are going, who cares? I'm just showing off. I don't want to think about that. So I like that you explained the reason,
Yeah, yeah.
reasons why it's important to keep it where it's not performative. And I love the fact, like you said, you're bringing your real live students in who
Hmm.
have real live need for
Yeah,
not
yeah.
breath into lotus, not putting a leg behind the head.
Yeah, exactly.
The other day I thought, I haven't done second series in a while because I've been trying to avoid I'm trying to be very careful with back bending and due to like disc issue. And but then I thought, I love second series so much and I've been staying away from it. Let me just do it without
Hmm.
doing any back bends, but not skipping any of the back bends. So like in camel,
Yeah,
just put hands on the hips, but just don't bend
yeah,
backward. And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Vajrasyasana, just something like that. Kapotasana, just maybe
yeah.
a little
Totally.
reach up.
Yeah,
And I had so
yeah.
much fun. I really
Oh,
actually
great.
had fun. I
Yeah,
don't know, I think it's important what you're talking about to keep the keep it real.
yeah,
Like
yeah. That's a good motto. Keep it real. I like that.
real. Just keep it real. All
Real.
right.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it simple and keep it real.
Yeah, yeah.
It's that easy, I guess then.
Well, yeah. I think as humans, we like to make things complicated, but in essence, I think things are pretty simple.
Yeah.
You
Oh
know,
man.
it's about stripping away. Stripping away, which can sometimes be the hardest part.
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I
Yeah. Thank you,
really
Todd.
appreciate you taking time and I know being a parent, you're busy as heck, and owning a studio, you're super busy. So thank you so much for carving out this time for me and trusting me and not knowing me and being willing to come on and be as open and honest as you are. So I really do appreciate it. Is there
thank you, Todd.
anything? Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. Is there anything that I missed and or in the process of turning into the conclusion that
Hmm.
you would like to add and or share or offer some inspiration? I'm trying to just pump out as much positivity as possible. So anything you can say to kind of just like for all of us listening, just help us to, kind of keep pushing forward here. Is there any thoughts you have
Um, well, I think
beyond
we
what you've
covered
already
a
shared?
lot of
Yeah.
great stuff, but
Yeah.
I think that something we touched on earlier is coming to me as perhaps the closing note of inspiration, and that's just to lead with love. And I don't mean that in kind of a woo-woo way. And there's this love and light sort of phrase that gets tossed around in our community, and that's not what I mean. I don't mean that everything is easy. Um, what I mean is that when we choose to lead with love, sometimes it requires struggle and discomfort, whether that's on the mat physically, um, or off the mat in our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with other people. If we can choose love, um, I think we're on the right track.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and, um, providing me this space to share my perspective.
Cool. Well, I will reach out to you again in the future and see what you've learned like in a year or two or something
Yeah.
and see if
Great. I look forward to
some big
it.
insights have come around. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Pranidhi. It's so great. And I will be in touch.
Great. Thank you,
Next,
Todd. Appreciate
my
it.
my wife's family live out in California, so next time they're like in
Oh,
the
awesome.
the kind of Newport area. So
Oh,
next
yeah,
time,
that's not too far. Yeah,
not too
come visit.
far. Next time we come out, I'll come practice with you
Great.
and I really look forward to it. So I will see you soon.
Okay, likewise.
Thank you.
Bye.